XPFC Wintergreen pulled away slowly with a look of scorn. "Sure I could," he explained with pride, "but I would never dream of doing anything like that." "Why not?" "Because it's your job. We all have our jobs to do. My job is to unload these Zippo lighters at a profit if I can and pick up some cotton from Milo. Your job is to bomb the ammunition dumps at Bologna." "But I'm going to be killed at Bologna," Yossarian pleaded. "We're all going to be killed." "Then you'll just have to be killed," replied XPFC Wintergreen. "Why can't you be a fatalist about it the way I am? If I'm destined to unload these lighters at a profit and pick up some Egyptian cotton cheap from Milo, then that's what I'm going to do. And if you're destined to be killed over Bologna, then you're going to be killed. So you might just as well go out and die like a man. I hate to say this, Yossarian, but you're turning into a chronic complainer." Clevenger agreed with XPFC Wintergreen that it was Yossarian's job to get killed over Bologna, and was livid with condemnation when Yossarian confessed that it was he who had moved the bomb line and caused the mission to be canceled. "Why the hell not?" Yossarian snarled, arguing all the more vehemently because he suspected he was wrong. "Am I supposed to get my ass shot off just because the colonel wants to be a general?" "What about the men on the mainland?" Clevenger demanded with just as much emotion. "Are they supposed to get their asses shot off just because you don't want to go? Those men are entitled to air support." "But not necessarily by me. Look, they don't care who knocks out those ammunition dumps. The only reason we're going is because that bastard Cathcart volunteered us." "Oh, I know all that," Clevenger assured him, his gaunt face pale and his agitated brown eyes swimming in sincerity. "But the fact remains that those ammunition dumps are still standing. You know very well that I don't approve of Colonel Cathcart any more than you do." Clevenger paused for emphasis, his mouth quivering, and then beat his fist down softly against his sleeping bag. "But it's not for us to determine what targets must be destroyed, or who's to destroy them, or who gets killed doing it, and why. Yes, even that. We have no right to question." "You're insane. No right to question. Do you really mean that it's not my business how or why I get killed, and that it is Colonel Cathcart's? Do you really mean that?" "Yes, I do," Clevenger insisted, seeming unsure. "There are men entrusted with winning the war who are in a much better position than we are to decide what targets have to be bombed." "We are talking about two different things," Yossarian answered, with exaggerated weariness. "You are talking about the relationship of the Air Corps to the infantry, and I am talking about the relationship of me to Colonel Cathcart. You are talking about winning the war, and I am talking about winning the war and keeping alive." "Exactly," Clevenger snapped smugly. "And which do you think is more important?" "To whom?" Yossarian shot back. "Open your eyes, Clevenger. It doesn't make a damned bit of difference who wins the war to someone who's dead." Clevenger sat for a moment as though he'd been slapped. "Congratulations," he exclaimed bitterly, the thinnest milk-white line enclosing his lips tightly in a bloodless, squeezing ring. "I can't think of another attitude that could be depended upon to give greater comfort to the enemy." "The enemy," retorted Yossarian with weighted precision, "is anybody who's going to get you killed, no matter which side he's on. And that includes Colonel Cathcart. And don't you forget that, because the longer you remember it, the longer you might live." But Clevenger did forget it, and now he was dead. At the time, Clevenger was so upset by the incident that Yossarian did not dare tell him he had also been responsible for the epidemic of diarrhea that had caused the other unnecessary postponement. Milo was even more upset by the possibility that someone had poisoned his squadron again, and he came bustling fretfully to Yossarian for assistance. "Please find out from Corporal Snark if he put laundry soap in the sweet potatoes again," he requested furtively. "Corporal Snark trusts you and will tell you the truth if you give him your word and you won't tell anyone else. As soon as he tells you, you come and tell me." "Of course I put laundry soap in the sweet potatoes," Corporal Snark admitted to Yossarian. "That's what you asked me to do, isn't it? Laundry soap is the best way." "He swears to God he didn't have a thing to do with it," Yossarian reported back to Milo. Milo pouted dubiously. "Dunbar says there is no God." There was no hope left. By the middle of the second week, everyone in the squadron began to look like Hungry Joe, who was not scheduled to fly and screamed horribly in his sleep. He was the only one who could sleep. All night long, men moved through the darkness outside their tents like tongueless wraiths with cigarettes. In the daylight, they stared at the bomb line in futile, drooping clusters, or at the still figure of Doc Danica sitting in front of the closed door of the medical tent beneath the morbid hand-lettered sign. They began to invent humorless, glum jokes of their own and disastrous rumors about the destruction awaiting them at Bologna. Yossarian sidled up drunkenly to Colonel Korn at the officers' club one night to kid with him about the new LePage gun that the Germans had moved in. "What LePage gun?" Colonel Korn inquired with curiosity. "The new 344mm LePage glue gun," Yossarian answered. "It glues a whole formation of planes together in midair." Colonel Korn jerked his elbow free from Yossarian's clutching fingers in startled affront. "Let go of me, you idiot!" he cried out furiously, glaring with vindictive approval as Nately leaped upon Yossarian's back and pulled him away. "Who is that lunatic, anyway?" Colonel Cathcart chortled merrily. "That's the man you made me give a medal to after Ferrara. You had me promote him to captain, too, remember? It serves you right." Nately was lighter than Yossarian, and had great difficulty maneuvering Yossarian's lurching bulk across the room to an unoccupied table. "Are you crazy?" Nately kept hissing with trepidation. "That was Colonel Korn. Are you crazy?" Yossarian wanted another drink, and promised to leave quietly if Nately brought him one. Then he made Nately bring him 2 more. When Nately finally coaxed him to the door, Captain Black came stomping in from outside, banging his sloshing shoes down hard on the wood floor and spilling water from his eaves like a high roof. "Boy, are you bastards in for it," he announced exuberantly, splashing away from the puddle forming at his feet. "I just got a call from Colonel Korn. Do you know what they've got waiting for you at Bologna? Ha-ha! They've got the new LePage glue gun. It glues a whole formation of planes together right in midair." "My God, it's true!" Yossarian shrieked, and collapsed against Nately in terror. "There is no God," answered Dunbar calmly, coming up with a slight stagger. "Hey, give me a hand with him, will you? I've got to get him back to his tent." "Says who?" "Says me. Gee, look at the rain. We've got to get a car." "Steal Captain Black's car," said Yossarian. "That's what I always do." "We can't steal anybody's car. Since you began stealing the nearest car every time you wanted one, nobody leaves the ignition on." "Hop in," said Chief White Half-Oat, driving up drunk in a covered jeep. He waited until they had crowded inside, and then spurted ahead with a suddenness that rolled them all over backward. He roared with laughter at their curses. He drove straight ahead when he left the parking lot and rammed the car into the embankment on the other side of the road. The others piled forward in a helpless heap and began cursing him again. "I forgot to turn," he explained. "Be careful, will you?" Nately cautioned. "You'd better put your headlights on." Chief White Half-Oat pulled back in reverse, made his turn, and shot away up the road at top speed. The wheels were sibilant on the whizzing blacktop surface. "Not so fast," urged Nately. "You'd better take me to your squadron first so I can help you put him to bed. Then you can drive me back to my squadron." "Who the hell are you?" "Dunbar." "Hey, put your headlights on," Nately shouted, "and watch the road." "They are on. Isn't Yossarian in this car? That's the only reason I let the rest of you bastards in." Chief White Half-Oat turned completely around to stare into the back seat. "Watch the road! Yossarian? Is Yossarian in here?" "I'm here, Chief. Let's go home." "What makes you so sure? You never answered my question." "You see, I told you he was here." "What question?" "Whatever it was we were talking about." "Was it important?" "I don't remember if it was important or not. I wish to God I knew what it was." "There is no God." "That's what we were talking about," Yossarian cried. "What makes you so sure?" "Hey, are you sure your headlights are on?" Nately called out. "They're on! They're on! What does he want from me? It's all this rain on the windshield that makes it look dark from back there." "Beautiful, beautiful rain. I hope it never stops raining. Rain, rain, go away, come again some other day. Little yo-yo wants to play in the meadow in..." Chief White Half-Oat missed the next turn in the road and ran the jeep all the way up to the crest of a steep embankment. Rolling back down, the jeep turned over on its side and settled softly in the mud. There was a frightened silence. "Is everyone all right?" Chief White Half-Oat inquired in a hushed voice. No one was injured, and he heaved a long sigh of relief. "You know, that's my trouble," he groaned. "I never listened to anybody. Somebody kept telling me to put my headlights on, but I just wouldn't listen." "I kept telling you to put your headlights on." I know. And I just wouldn't listen, would I? I wish I had a drink. I do have a drink. Look, it's not broken. It's raining in, Nately noticed. I'm getting wet." Chief White Half-Oat got the bottle of rye open, drank, and handed it off. Lying tangled up on top of each other, they all drank, but Nately, who kept groping ineffectually for the door handle. The bottle fell against his head with a clunk, and whiskey poured down his neck. He began writhing convulsively. "Hey, we've got to get out of here," he cried. "We'll all drown." "Is anybody in there?" asked Clevenger with concern, shining a flashlight down from the top. "It's Clevenger!" they shouted, and tried to pull him in through the window as he reached down to aid them. "Look at them!" Clevenger exclaimed indignantly to McWatt, who sat grinning at the wheel of the staff car. "Lying there like a bunch of drunken animals. You too, Nately? You ought to be ashamed. Come on, help me to get them out of here before they all die of pneumonia." "You know, that don't sound like such a bad idea," Chief White Half-Oat reflected. "I think I will die of pneumonia." "Why?" "Why not?" answered Chief White Half-Oat, and lay back in the mud contentedly with the bottle of rye cuddled in his arms. "Oh, now look what he's doing," Clevenger exclaimed with irritation. "Will you get up and get into the car so we can all go back to the squadron?" "We can't all go back. Someone has to stay here and help the chief with this car he signed out of the motor pool." Chief White Half-Oat settled back in the staff car with an ebullient, prideful chuckle. "That's Captain Black's car," he informed them jubilantly. "I stole it from him at the officers' club just now with an extra set of keys he thought he lost this morning." "Well, I'll be damned. That calls for a drink." "Haven't you had enough to drink?" Clevenger began scolding as soon as McWatt started the car. "Look at you. You don't care if you drink yourselves to death or drown yourselves to death, do you?" "Just as long as we don't fly ourselves to death." "Hey, open it up, Chief White Half-Oat urged McWatt. "And turn off the headlights. That's the only way to do it." "Dr. Nika is right," Clevenger went on. "People don't know enough to take care of themselves. I really am disgusted with all of you." "Okay, Fat Mouth, out of the car," Chief White Half-Oat ordered. "Everybody get out of the car but Yossarian. Where's Yossarian?" "Get the hell off me," Yossarian laughed, pushing him away. "You're all covered with mud." Clevenger focused on Nately. "You're the one who really surprises me. Do you know what you smell like? Instead of trying to keep him out of trouble, you just get as drunk as he is. Suppose he got in another fight with Appleby." Clevenger's eyes opened wide with alarm when he heard Yossarian's chuckle. "He didn't get in another fight with Appleby, did he?" "Not this time," said Dunbar. "No, not this time. This time I did even better. This time he got in a fight with Colonel Corn." "He didn't," gasped Clevenger. "He did?" exclaimed Chief White Half-Oat with delight. "That calls for a drink." "But that's terrible," Clevenger declared with deep apprehension. "Why in the world did you have to pick on Colonel Corn? Say, what happened to the lights? Why is everything so dark?" "I turned them off," answered McWatt. "You know, Chief White Half-Oat is right. It's much better with the headlights off." "Are you crazy?" Clevenger screamed and lunged forward to snap the headlights on. He whirled around upon Yossarian in near hysteria. "You see what you're doing? You've got them all acting like you. Suppose it stops raining and we have to fly to Bologna tomorrow. You'll be in fine physical condition." "It won't ever gonna stop raining. No, sir, a rain like this really might go on forever." "It has stopped raining," someone said, and the whole car fell silent. "You poor bastards," Chief White Half-Oat murmured compassionately after a few moments had passed. "Did it really stop raining?" Yossarian asked meekly. McWatt switched off the windshield wipers to make certain. The rain had stopped. The sky was starting to clear. The moon was sharp behind a gauzy brown mist. "Oh, well," sang McWatt soberly. "What the hell?" "Don't worry, fellas," Chief White Half-Oat said. "The landing strip is too soft to use tomorrow. Maybe it'll start raining again before the field dries out." "You goddamn stinking lousy son of a bitch," Hungry Joe screamed from his tent as they sped into the squadron. "Jesus, is he back here tonight? I thought he was still in Rome with the courier ship." Oh, Hungry Joe screamed. Chief White Half-Oat shuddered. "That guy gives me the willies," he confessed in a grouchy whisper. "Hey, whatever happened to Captain Flume?" "There's a guy that gives me the willies. I saw him in the woods last week eating wild berries. He never sleeps in his trailer anymore. He looked like hell." Hungry Joe's afraid he'll have to replace somebody who goes on sick call, even though there is no sick call. "Did you see him the other night when he tried to kill Havermeyer and fell into Yossarian's slit trench?" "Oh," screamed Hungry Joe. "Oh, oh, oh." "It sure is a pleasure not having Flume around in the mess hall anymore. No more of that pass the salt, Walt, or shoot me a beet, Pete, or pass the bread, Fred." Keep away, Hungry Joe screamed. "I said keep away. Keep away, you goddamn stinking lousy son of a bitch." "At least we found out what he dreams about," Dunbar observed wryly. "He dreams about goddamn stinking lousy sons of bitches." Late that night, Hungry Joe dreamed that Hupple's cat was sleeping on his face, suffocating him. And when he woke up, Hupple's cat was sleeping on his face. His agony was terrifying. The piercing, unearthly howl with which he split the moonlit dark, vibrating in its own impact for seconds afterward like a devastating shock. A numbing silence followed, and then a riotous din rose from inside his tent. Yossarian was among the first ones there. When he burst through the entrance, Hungry Joe had his gun out and was struggling to wrench his arm free from Hupple to shoot the cat, who kept spitting and feinting at him ferociously to distract him from shooting Hupple. Both humans were in their GI underwear. The unfrosted light bulb overhead was swinging crazily on its loose wire, and the jumbled black shadows kept swirling and bobbing chaotically, so that the entire tent seemed to be reeling. Yossarian reached out instinctively for balance and then launched himself forward in a prodigious dive that crushed the three combatants to the ground beneath him. He emerged from the melee with the scruff of a neck in each hand, Hungry Joe's neck and the cat's. Hungry Joe and the cat glared at each other savagely. The cat spat viciously at Hungry Joe, and Hungry Joe tried to hit it with a haymaker. "A fair fight," Yossarian decreed, and all the others who had come running to the uproar in horror began cheering ecstatically in a tremendous overflow of relief. "We'll have a fair fight," he explained officially to Hungry Joe and the cat, after he had carried them both outside, still holding them apart by the scruffs of their necks. "Fists, fangs, and claws, but no guns," he warned Hungry Joe. "And no spitting," he warned the cat sternly. "When I turn you both loose, go. Break clean in the clinches and come back fighting. Go." There was a huge, giddy crowd of men who were avid for any diversion, but the cat turned chicken the moment Yossarian released him, and fled from Hungry Joe ignominiously like a yellow dog. Hungry Joe was declared the winner. He swaggered away happily with the proud smile of a champion, his shriveled head high and his emaciated chest out. He went back to bed victorious, and dreamed again that Hupple's cat was sleeping on his face, suffocating him. Chapter 13. Major Blank de Coverley. Moving the bomb line did not fool the Germans, but it did fool Major Blank de Coverley, who packed his musette bag, commandeered an airplane, and, under the impression that Florence, too, had been captured by the Allies, had himself flown to that city to rent 2 apartments for the officers and the enlisted men in the squadron to use on rest leaves. He had still not returned by the time Yossarian jumped back outside Major's office and wondered whom to appeal to next for help. Major Blank de Coverley was a splendid, awe-inspiring, grave old man with a massive, leonine head and an angry shock of wild white hair that raged like a blizzard around his stern, patriarchal face. His duties as squadron executive officer did consist entirely, as both Doc Danica and Major had conjectured, of pitching horseshoes, kidnapping Italian laborers, and renting apartments for the enlisted men and officers to use on rest leaves, and he excelled at all 3. Each time the fall of a city like Naples, Rome, or Florence seemed imminent, Major Blank de Coverley would pack his musette bag, commandeer an airplane and a pilot, and have himself flown away, accomplishing all this without uttering a word, by the sheer force of his solemn, domineering visage and the peremptory gestures of his wrinkled finger. A day or 2 after the city fell, he would be back with leases on 2 large and luxurious apartments there, one for the officers and one for the enlisted men, both already staffed with competent, jolly cooks and maids. A few days after that, newspapers would appear throughout the world with photographs of the first American soldiers bludgeoning their way into the shattered city through rubble and smoke. Inevitably, Major Blank de Coverley was among them, seated straight as a ramrod in a jeep he had obtained from somewhere, glancing neither right nor left as the artillery fire burst about his invincible head, and lithe young infantrymen with carbines went loping up along the sidewalks in the shelter of burning buildings, or fell dead in doorways. He seemed eternally indestructible as he sat there surrounded by danger, his features molded firmly into that same fierce, regal, just, and forbidding countenance which was recognized and revered by every man in the squadron. To German intelligence, Major Blank de Coverley was a vexatious enigma. Not one of the hundreds of American prisoners would ever supply any concrete information about the elderly white-haired officer with the gnarled and menacing brow and blazing, powerful eyes, who seemed to spearhead every important advance so fearlessly and successfully. To American authorities, his identity was equally perplexing. A whole regiment of crack CID men had been thrown into the front lines to find out who he was, while a battalion of combat-hardened public relations officers stood on red alert 24 hours a day with orders to begin publicizing him the moment he was located. In Rome, Major Blank de Coverley had outdone himself with the apartments. For the officers, who arrived in groups of 4 or 5, there was an immense double room for each in a new white stone building, with 3 spacious bathrooms with walls of shimmering aquamarine tile, and one skinny maid named Michaela, who tittered at everything and kept the apartment in spotless order. On the landing below lived the obsequious owners. On the landing above lived the beautiful, rich, black-haired countess and her beautiful, rich, black-haired daughter-in-law, both of whom would put out only for Nately, who was too shy to want them, and for Arfie, who was too stuffy to take them, and tried to dissuade them from ever putting out for anyone but their husbands, who had chosen to remain in the North with the family's business interests. "They're really a couple of good kids," Arfie confided earnestly to Yossarian, whose recurring dream it was to have the nude, milk-white female bodies of both these beautiful, rich, black-haired good kids lying stretched out in bed erotically with him at the same time. The enlisted men descended upon Rome in gangs of 12 or more, with gargantuan appetites and heavy crates filled with canned food for the women to cook and serve to them in the dining room of their own apartment on the 6th floor of a red brick building with a clinking elevator. There was always more activity at the enlisted men's place. There were always more enlisted men to begin with, and more women to cook and serve and sweep and scrub. And then there were always the gay and silly, sensual young girls that Yossarian had found and brought there, and those that the sleepy enlisted men, returning to Pianosa after their exhausting 7-day debauch, had brought there on their own, and were leaving behind for whoever wanted them next. The girls had shelter and food for as long as they wanted to stay. All they had to do in return was hump any of the men who asked them to, which seemed to make everything just about perfect for them. Every 4th day or so, Hungry Joe came crashing in like a man in torment, hoarse, wild, and frenetic if he had been unlucky enough to finish his missions again and was flying the courier ship. Most times he slept at the enlisted men's apartment. Nobody was certain how many rooms Major Blank de Coverley had rented, not even the stout, black-bodiced woman in corsets on the 1st floor from whom he had rented them. They covered the whole top floor, and Yossarian knew they extended down to the 5th floor as well, for it was in Snowden's room on the 5th floor that he had finally found the maid in the lime-colored panties with a dust mop the day after Bologna, after Hungry Joe had discovered him in bed with Luciana at the officer's apartment that same morning, and had gone running like a fiend for his camera. The maid in the lime-colored panties was a cheerful, fat, obliging woman in her mid-30s, with squashy thighs and swaying hams in lime-colored panties that she was always rolling off for any man who wanted her. She had a plain, broad face and was the most virtuous woman alive. She laid for everybody, regardless of race, creed, color, or place of national origin, donating herself sociably as an act of hospitality, procrastinating not even for the moment it might take to discard the cloth or broom or dust mop she was clutching at the time she was grabbed. Her allure stemmed from her accessibility. Like Mount Everest, she was there, and the men climbed on top of her each time they felt the urge. Yossarian was in love with the maid in the lime-colored panties because she seemed to be the only woman left he could make love to without falling in love with. Even the bald-headed girl in Sicily still evoked in him strong sensations of pity, tenderness, and regret. Despite the multiple perils to which Major Blank de Coverley exposed himself each time he rented apartments, his only injury had occurred, ironically enough, while he was leading the triumphal procession into the open city of Rome, where he was wounded in the eye by a flower fired at him from close range by a seedy, cackling, intoxicated old man, who, like Satan himself, had then bounded up on Major Blank de Coverley's car with malicious glee, seized him roughly and contemptuously by his venerable white head, and kissed him mockingly on each cheek with a mouth reeking with sour fumes of wine, cheese, and garlic, before dropping back into the joyous, celebrating throngs with a hollow, dry, excoriating laugh. Major Blank de Coverley, a Spartan in adversity, did not flinch once throughout the whole hideous ordeal, and not until he had returned to Pianosa, his business in Rome completed, did he seek medical attention for his wound. He resolved to remain binocular, and specified to Dr. Nika that his eye patch be transparent, so that he could continue pitching horseshoes, kidnapping Italian laborers, and renting apartments with unimpaired vision. To the men in the squadron, Major Blank de Coverley was a colossus, although they never dared tell him so. The only one who ever did dare address him was Milo Minderbinder, who approached the horseshoe pitching pit with a hard-boiled egg his second week in the squadron, and held it aloft for Major Blank de Coverley to see. Major Blank de Coverley straightened with astonishment at Milo's effrontery, and concentrated upon him the full fury of his storming countenance, with its rugged overhang of gullied forehead and huge crag of a hump-backed nose that came charging out of his face wrathfully like a Big Ten fullback. Milo stood his ground, taking shelter behind the hard-boiled egg, raised protectively before his face like a magic charm. In time, the gale began to subside, and the danger passed. "What is it?" Major Blank de Coverley demanded at last. "An egg," Milo answered. "What kind of an egg?" Major Blank de Coverley demanded. "A hard-boiled egg," Milo answered. "What kind of a hard-boiled egg?" Major Blank de Coverley demanded. "A fresh hard-boiled egg," Milo answered. "Where did the fresh egg come from?" Major Blank de Coverley demanded. "From a chicken," Milo answered. "Where is the chicken?" Major Blank de Coverley demanded. "The chicken is in Malta," Milo answered. "How many chickens are there in Malta?" "Enough chickens to lay fresh eggs for every officer in the squadron at 5 cents apiece from the mess fund," Milo answered. "I have a weakness for fresh eggs," Major Blank de Coverley confessed. "If someone put a plane at my disposal, I could fly down there once a week in a squadron plane and bring back all the fresh eggs we need," Milo answered. "After all, Malta's not so far away." "Malta's not so far away," Major Blank de Coverley observed. "You could probably fly down there once a week in a squadron plane and bring back all the fresh eggs we need." "Yes," Milo agreed. "I suppose I could do that, if someone wanted me to and put a plane at my disposal." "I like my fresh eggs fried," Major Blank de Coverley remembered, "in fresh butter." "I can find all the fresh butter we need in Sicily for 25 cents a pound," Milo answered. 25 cents a pound for fresh butter is a good buy. There's enough money in the mess fund for butter, too, and we could probably sell some to the other squadrons at a profit and get back most of what we pay for our own. "What's your name, son?" asked Major Blank de Coverley. "My name is Milo Minderbinder, sir. I am 27 years old." "You're a good mess officer, Milo." "I'm not the mess officer, sir." "You're a good mess officer, Milo." "Thank you, sir. I'll do everything in my power to be a good mess officer." "Bless you, my boy. Have a horseshoe." "Thank you, sir. What should I do with it?" "Throw it." "Away?" "At that peg there. Then pick it up and throw it at this peg. It's a game, see? You get the horseshoe back." "Yes, sir, I see. How much are horseshoes selling for?" The smell of a fresh egg, snapping exotically in a pool of fresh butter, carried a long way on the Mediterranean trade winds, and brought General Dreedel racing back with a voracious appetite, accompanied by his nurse, who accompanied him everywhere, and his son-in-law, Colonel Mudus. In the beginning, General Dreedel devoured all his meals in Milo's mess hall. Then the other 3 squadrons in Colonel Cathcart's group turned their mess halls over to Milo and gave him an airplane and a pilot each so that he could buy fresh eggs and fresh butter for them too. Milo's planes shuttled back and forth 7 days a week as every officer in the 4 squadrons began devouring fresh eggs in an insatiable orgy of fresh egg eating. General Dreedel devoured fresh eggs for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Between meals, he devoured more fresh eggs, until Milo located abundant sources of fresh veal, beef, duck, baby lamb chops, mushroom caps, broccoli, South African rock lobster tails, shrimp, hams, puddings, grapes, ice cream, strawberries, and artichokes. There were 3 other bomb groups in General Dreedel's combat wing, and they each jealously dispatched their own planes to Malta for fresh eggs, but discovered that fresh eggs were selling there for 7 cents apiece. Since they could buy them from Milo for 5 cents apiece, it made more sense to turn over their mess halls to his syndicate too, and give him the planes and pilots needed to ferry in all the other good food he promised to supply as well. Everyone was elated with this turn of events, most of all Colonel Cathcart, who was convinced he had won a feather in his cap. He greeted Milo jovially each time they met, and, in an excess of contrite generosity, impulsively recommended Major for promotion. The recommendation was rejected at once at 27th Air Force Headquarters by ex-PFC Wintergreen, who scribbled a brusque, unsigned reminder that the Army had only one Major, and did not intend to lose him by promotion just to please Colonel Cathcart. Colonel Cathcart was stung by the blunt rebuke and skulked guiltily about his room in smarting repudiation. He blamed Major for this black eye and decided to bust him down to lieutenant that very same day. "They probably won't let you," Colonel Corn remarked with a condescending smile, savoring the situation, "for precisely the same reasons that they wouldn't let you promote him. Besides, you'd certainly look foolish trying to bust him down to lieutenant right after you tried to promote him to my rank." Colonel Cathcart felt hemmed in on every side. He had been much more successful in obtaining a medal for Yossarian after the debacle of Ferrara, when the bridge spanning the Po was still standing undamaged 7 days after Colonel Cathcart had volunteered to destroy it. 9 missions his men had flown there in 6 days, and the bridge was not demolished until the 10th mission on the 7th day, when Yossarian killed Kraft and his crew by taking his flight of 6 planes in over the target a second time. Yossarian came in carefully on his second bomb run, because he was brave then. He buried his head in his bomb sight until his bombs were away. When he looked up, everything inside the ship was suffused in a weird orange glow. At first he thought that his own plane was on fire. Then he spied the plane with the burning engine directly above him, and screamed to McWatt through the intercom to turn left hard. A second later, the wing of Kraft's plane blew off. The flaming wreck dropped, first the fuselage, then the spinning wing, while a shower of tiny metal fragments began tap-dancing on the roof of Yossarian's own plane, and the incessant ka-chung, ka-chung, ka-chung of the flak was still thumping all around him. Back on the ground, every eye watched grimly as he walked in dull dejection up to Captain Black outside the green clapboard briefing room to make his intelligence report, and learned that Colonel Cathcart and Colonel Corn were waiting to speak to him inside. Major Danby stood barring the door, waving everyone else away in ashen silence. Yossarian was leaden with fatigue and longed to remove his sticky clothing. He stepped into the briefing room with mixed emotions, uncertain how he was supposed to feel about Kraft and the others, for they had all died in the distance of a mute and secluded agony at a moment when he was up to his own ass in the same vile, excruciating dilemma of duty and damnation. Colonel Cathcart, on the other hand, was all broken up by the event. "Twice?" he asked. "I would have missed it the first time," Yossarian replied softly, his face lowered. Their voices echoed slightly in the long, narrow bungalow. "But twice?" Colonel Cathcart repeated in vivid disbelief. "I would have missed it the first time," Yossarian repeated, "but Kraft would be alive, and the bridge would still be up. A trained bombardier is supposed to drop his bombs the first time," Colonel Cathcart reminded him. "The other 5 bombardiers dropped their bombs the first time, and missed the target," Yossarian said, we'd have had to go back there again. And maybe you would have gotten it the first time then, and maybe I wouldn't have gotten it at all. But maybe there wouldn't have been any losses. And maybe there would have been more losses with the bridge still left standing. I thought you wanted the bridge destroyed. Don't contradict me, Colonel Cathcart said. We're all in enough trouble. I'm not contradicting you, sir. Yes, you are. Even that's a contradiction. Yes, sir, I'm sorry. Colonel Cathcart cracked his knuckles violently. Colonel Corn, a stocky, dark, flaccid man with a shapeless paunch, sat completely relaxed on one of the benches in the front row, his hands clasped comfortably over the top of his bald and swarthy head. His eyes were amused behind his glinting, rimless spectacles. "We're trying to be perfectly objective about this," he prompted Colonel Cathcart. "We're trying to be perfectly objective about this," Colonel Cathcart said to Yossarian, with the zeal of sudden inspiration. "It's not that I'm being sentimental or anything. I don't give a damn about the men or the airplane. It's just that it looks so lousy on the report. How am I going to cover up something like this in the report?" "Why don't you give me a medal?" Yossarian suggested timidly. "For going around twice? You gave one to Hungry Joe when he cracked up that airplane by mistake." Colonel Cathcart snickered ruefully. "You'll be lucky if we don't give you a court-martial." "But I got the bridge the second time around," Yossarian protested. "I thought you wanted the bridge destroyed." "Oh, I don't know what I wanted," Colonel Cathcart cried out in exasperation. "Look, of course I wanted the bridge destroyed. That bridge has been a source of trouble to me ever since I decided to send you men out to get it. But why couldn't you do it the first time?" "I didn't have enough time. My navigator wasn't sure we had the right city." "The right city?" Colonel Cathcart was baffled. "Are you trying to blame it all on Arfie now?" "No, sir. It was my mistake for letting him distract me. All I'm trying to say is that I'm not infallible." "Nobody is infallible," Colonel Cathcart said sharply, and then continued vaguely with an afterthought, "Nobody is indispensable either." There was no rebuttal. Colonel Corn stretched sluggishly. "We've got to reach a decision," he observed casually to Colonel Cathcart. "We've got to reach a decision," Colonel Cathcart said to Yossarian, "and it's all your fault. Why did you have to go around twice? Why couldn't you drop your bombs the first time like all the others?" "I would have missed the first time." "It seems to me that we're going around twice," Colonel Corn interrupted with a chuckle. "But what are we going to do?" Colonel Cathcart exclaimed with distress. "The others are all waiting outside." "Why don't we give him a medal?" Colonel Corn proposed. "For going around twice? What can we give him a medal for?" "For going around twice," Colonel Corn answered with a reflective, self-satisfied smile. "After all, I suppose it did take a lot of courage to go over that target a second time, with no other planes around to divert the anti-aircraft fire. And he did hit the bridge. You know, that might be the answer. To act boastfully about something we ought to be ashamed of. That's a trick that never seems to fail. Do you think it will work?" "I'm sure it will. And let's promote him to captain, too, just to make certain." "Don't you think that's going a bit farther than we have to?" "No, I don't think so. It's best to play safe. And a captain's not much difference." "All right," Colonel Cathcart decided. "We'll give him a medal for being brave enough to go around over the target twice. And we'll make him a captain, too." Colonel Corn reached for his hat. "Exit smiling," he joked, and put his arm around Yossarian's shoulders as they stepped outside the door. Chapter 14. Kid Sampson. By the time of the mission to Bologna, Yossarian was brave enough not to go around over the target even once, and when he found himself aloft finally in the nose of Kid Sampson's plane, he pressed in the button of his throat mic and asked, "Well, what's wrong with the plane?" Kid Sampson let out a shriek. "Is something wrong with the plane? What's the matter?" Kid Sampson's cry turned Yossarian to ice. "Is something the matter?" he yelled in horror. "Are we bailing out?" "I don't know," Kid Sampson shot back in anguish, wailing excitedly. "Someone said we're bailing out. Who is this anyway? Who is this?" "This is Yossarian in the nose. Yossarian in the nose. I heard you say there was something the matter. Didn't you say there was something the matter? I thought you said there was something wrong. Everything seems okay. Everything is all right." Yossarian's heart sank. Something was terribly wrong if everything was all right and they had no excuse for turning back. He hesitated gravely. "I can't hear you," he said. "I said everything is all right." The sun was blinding white on the porcelain blue water below and on the flashing edges of the other airplanes. Yossarian took hold of the colored wires leading into the jackbox of the intercom system and tore them loose. "I still can't hear you," he said. He heard nothing. Slowly, he collected his map case and 3 flak suits and crawled back to the main compartment. Nately, sitting stiffly in the co-pilot's seat, spied him through the corner of his eye as he stepped up on the flight deck behind Kid Sampson. He smiled at Yossarian wanly, looking frail and exceptionally young and bashful in the bulky dungeon of his earphones, hat, throat mic, flak suit, and parachute. Yossarian bent close to Kid Sampson's ear. "I still can't hear you," he shouted above the even drone of the engines. Kid Sampson glanced back at him with surprise. Kid Sampson had an angular, comical face with arched eyebrows and a scrawny blonde mustache. "What?" he called out over his shoulder. "I still can't hear you," Yossarian repeated. "You'll have to talk louder," Kid Sampson said. "I still can't hear you." "I said I still can't hear you," Yossarian yelled. "I can't help it," Kid Sampson yelled back at him. "I'm shouting as loud as I can." "I couldn't hear you over my intercom," Yossarian bellowed in mounting helplessness. "You'll have to turn back." "For an intercom?" asked Kid Sampson incredulously. "Turn back," said Yossarian, "before I break your head." Kid Sampson looked for moral support toward Nately, who stared away from him pointedly. Yossarian outranked them both. Kid Sampson resisted doubtfully for another moment, and then capitulated eagerly with a triumphant whoop. "That's just fine with me," he announced gladly, and blew out a shrill series of whistles up into his mustache. "Yes, sirree, that's just fine with old Kid Sampson." He whistled again and shouted over the intercom, "Now hear this, my little chickadees. This is Admiral Kid Sampson talking. This is Admiral Kid Sampson squawking, the pride of the Queen's Marines. Yes, sirree, we're turning back, boys, by cracky. We're turning back." Nately ripped off his hat and earphones in one jubilant sweep and began rocking back and forth happily, like a handsome child in a high chair. Sergeant Knight came plummeting down from the top gun turret and began pounding them all on the back with delirious enthusiasm. Kid Sampson turned the plane away from the formation in a wide, graceful arc and headed toward the airfield. When Yossarian plugged his headset into one of the auxiliary jackboxes, the 2 gunners in the rear section of the plane were both singing La Cucaracha. Back at the field, the party fizzled out abruptly. An uneasy silence replaced it, and Yossarian was sober and self-conscious as he climbed down from the plane and took his place in the jeep that was already waiting for them. None of the men spoke at all on the drive back through the heavy, mesmerizing, quiet, blanketing mountains, sea, and forests. The feeling of desolation persisted when they turned off the road at the squadron. Yossarian got out of the car last. After a minute, Yossarian and a gentle, warm wind were the only things stirring in the haunting tranquility that hung like a drug over the vacated tents. Yossarian got out of the car last. After a minute, Yossarian and a gentle, warm wind were the only things stirring in the haunting tranquility that hung like a drug over the vacated tents. The squadron stood insensate, bereft of everything human but Doctonica, who roosted dolorously like a shivering turkey buzzard beside the closed door of the medical tent, his stuffed nose jabbing away in thirsting futility at the hazy sunlight streaming down around him. Yossarian knew Doctonica would not go swimming with him. Doctonica would never go swimming again. A person could swoon or suffer a mild coronary occlusion in an inch or 2 of water and drown to death, be carried out to sea by an undertow, or made vulnerable to poliomyelitis or meningococcus infection through chilling or overexertion. The threat of Bologna to others had instilled in Doctonica an even more poignant solicitude for his own safety. At night now, he heard burglars. Through the lavender gloom, clouding the entrance of the operations tent, Yossarian glimpsed Chief White Half-Oat, diligently embezzling whiskey rations, forging the signatures of non-drinkers, and pouring off the alcohol with which he was poisoning himself into separate bottles rapidly in order to steal as much as he could, before Captain Black roused himself with recollection and came hurrying over indolently to steal the rest himself. The jeep started up again softly. Kid Sampson, Nately, and the others wandered apart in a noiseless eddy of motion and were sucked away into the cloying yellow stillness. The jeep vanished with a cough. Yossarian was alone in a ponderous primeval lull in which everything green looked black and everything else was imbued with the color of pus. The breeze rustled leaves in a dry and diaphanous distance. He was restless, scared, and sleepy. The sockets of his eyes felt grimy with exhaustion. Wearily, he moved inside the parachute tent with its long table of smoothed wood, a nagging bitch of a doubt burrowing painlessly inside a conscience that felt perfectly clear. He left his flak suit and parachute there and crossed back past the water wagon to the intelligence tent to return his map case to Captain Black, who sat drowsing in his chair with his skinny long legs up on his desk, and inquired with indifferent curiosity why Yossarian's plane had turned back. Yossarian ignored him. He set the map down on the counter and walked out. Back in his own tent, he squirmed out of his parachute harness and then out of his clothes. Orr was in Rome, due back that same afternoon from the rest leave he had won by ditching his plane in the waters off Genoa. Nately would already be packing to replace him, entranced to find himself still alive, and undoubtedly impatient to resume his wasted and heartbreaking courtship of his prostitute in Rome. When Yossarian was undressed, he sat down on his cot to rest. He felt much better as soon as he was naked. He never felt comfortable in clothes. In a little while, he put fresh undershorts back on and set out for the beach in his moccasins, a khaki-colored bath towel draped over his shoulders. The path from the squadron led him around a mysterious gun emplacement in the woods. 2 of the 3 enlisted men stationed there lay sleeping on the circle of sandbags, and the third sat eating a purple pomegranate, biting off large mouthfuls between his churning jaws, and spewing the ground roughage out away from him into the bushes. When he bit, red juice ran out of his mouth. Yossarian padded ahead into the forest again, caressing his bare, tingling belly adoringly from time to time, as though to reassure himself it was all still there. He rolled a piece of lint out of his navel. Along the ground, suddenly, on both sides of the path, he saw dozens of new mushrooms the rain had spawned, poking their nodular fingers up through the clammy earth like lifeless stalks of flesh, sprouting in such necrotic profusion everywhere he looked, that they seemed to be proliferating right before his eyes. There were thousands of them, swarming as far back into the underbrush as he could see, and they appeared to swell in size and multiply in number as he spied them. He hurried away from them with a shiver of eerie alarm, and did not slacken his pace until the soil crumbled to dry sand beneath his feet, and they had been left behind. He glanced back apprehensively, half expecting to find the limp white things crawling after him in sightless pursuit, or snaking up through the treetops in a writhing and ungovernable mutative mass. The beach was deserted. The only sounds were hushed ones, the bloated gurgle of the stream, the respirating hum of the tall grass and shrubs behind him, the apathetic moaning of the dumb, translucent waves. The surf was always small, the water clear and cool. Yossarian left his things on the sand and moved through the knee-high waves until he was completely immersed. On the other side of the sea, a bumpy sliver of dark land lay wrapped in mist, almost invisible. He swam languorously out to the raft, held on a moment, and swam languorously back to where he could stand on the sandbar. He submerged himself head first into the green water several times until he felt clean and wide awake, and then stretched himself out face down in the sand, and slept until the planes returning from Bologna were almost overhead, and the great cumulative rumble of their many engines came crashing in through his slumber in an earth-shattering roar. He woke up blinking with a slight pain in his head, and opened his eyes upon a world boiling in chaos in which everything was in proper order. He gasped in utter amazement at the fantastic sight of the 12 flights of planes, organized calmly into exact formation. The scene was too unexpected to be true. There were no planes spurting ahead with wounded, none lagging behind with damage. No distress flares smoked in the sky. No ship was missing but his own. For an instant he was paralyzed with a sensation of madness. Then he understood, and almost wept at the irony. The explanation was simple. Clouds had covered the target before the planes could bomb it, and the mission to Bologna was still to be flown. He was wrong. There had been no clouds. Bologna had been bombed. Bologna was a milk run. There had been no flak there at all. Chapter 15. Pilchard and Wren. Captain Pilchard and Captain Wren, the inoffensive Joint Squadron Operations officers, were both mild, soft-spoken men of less than middle height, who enjoyed flying combat missions and begged nothing more of life and Colonel Cathcart than the opportunity to continue flying them. They had flown hundreds of combat missions and wanted to fly hundreds more. They assigned themselves to every one. Nothing so wonderful as war had ever happened to them before, and they were afraid it might never happen to them again. They conducted their duties humbly and reticently, with a minimum of fuss, and went to great lengths not to antagonize anyone. They smiled quickly at everyone they passed. When they spoke, they mumbled. They were shifty, cheerful, subservient men who were comfortable only with each other and never met anyone else's eyes, not even Yossarian's eye at the open-air meeting they called to reprimand him publicly for making Kid Sampson turn back from the mission to Bologna. "Fellas," said Captain Pilchard, who had thinning dark hair and smiled awkwardly, "when you turn back from a mission, try to make sure it's for something important, will you? Not for something unimportant, like a defective intercom, or something like that. Okay? Captain Wren has more he wants to say to you on that subject." "Captain Pilchard's right, fellas," said Captain Wren, "and that's all I'm going to say to you on that subject. Well, we finally got to Bologna today, and we found out it's a milk run. We were all a little nervous, I guess, and didn't do too much damage. Well, listen to this. Colonel Cathcart got permission for us to go back. And tomorrow, we're really going to paste those ammunition dumps. Now, what do you think about that?" And to prove to Yossarian that they bore him no animosity, they even assigned him to fly lead bombardier with McWatt in the first formation when they went back to Bologna the next day. He came in on the target like a Habermeyer, confidently taking no evasive action at all, and suddenly they were shooting the living shit out of him. Heavy flak was everywhere. He had been lulled, lured, and trapped, and there was nothing he could do but sit there like an idiot and watch the ugly black puffs smashing up to kill him. There was nothing he could do until his bombs dropped but look back into the bomb sight, where the fine crosshairs in the lens were glued magnetically over the target, exactly where he had placed them, intersecting perfectly deep inside the yard of his block of camouflaged warehouses before the base of the first building. He was trembling steadily as the plane crept ahead. He could hear the hollow boom, 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 boom of the flak pounding all around him in overlapping measures of 4, the sharp, piercing crack of a single shell exploding suddenly very close by. His head was busting with 1,000 dissonant impulses as he prayed for the bombs to drop. He wanted to sob. The engines droned on monotonously like a fat, lazy fly. At last, the indices on the bomb sight crossed, tripping away the 8 500-pounders one after the other. The plane lurched upward buoyantly with the lightened load. Yossarian bent away from the bomb sight crookedly to watch the indicator on his left. When the pointer touched 0, he closed the bomb bay doors and, over the intercom at the very top of his voice, shrieked, "Turn right hard!" McWatt responded instantly. With a grinding howl of engines, he flipped the plane over on one wing and wrung it around remorselessly in a screaming turn away from the twin spires of flak Yossarian had spied stabbing toward them. Then Yossarian had McWatt climb and keep climbing higher and higher until they tore free finally into a calm diamond blue sky that was sunny and pure everywhere and laced in the distance with long white veils of tenuous fluff. The wind strummed soothingly against the cylindrical panes of his windows, and he relaxed exultantly only until they picked up speed again, and then turned McWatt left and plunged him right back down, noticing with a transitory spasm of elation the mushrooming clusters of flak leaping open high above him and back over his shoulder to the right, exactly where he could have been if he had not turned left and dived. He leveled McWatt out with another harsh cry and whipped him upward and around again into a ragged blue patch of unpolluted air just as the bombs he had dropped began to strike. The first one fell in the yard exactly where he had aimed, and then the rest of the bombs from his own plane and from the other planes in his flight burst open on the ground in a charge of rapid orange flashes across the tops of the buildings, which collapsed instantly in a vast churning wave of pink and gray and coal-black smoke that went rolling out turbulently in all directions and quaked convulsively in its bowels as though from great blasts of red and white and golden sheet lightning. "Well, will you look at that?" Arfie marveled sonorously right beside Yossarian, his plump, orbicular face sparkling with a look of bright enchantment. "There must have been an ammunition dump down there." Yossarian had forgotten about Arfie. "Get out!" he shouted at him. "Get out of the nose!" Arfie smiled politely and pointed down toward the target in a generous invitation for Yossarian to look. Yossarian began slapping at him insistently and signaled wildly toward the entrance of the crawlway. "Get back in the ship!" he cried frantically. "Get back in the ship!" Arfie shrugged amiably. "I can't hear you," he explained. Yossarian seized him by the straps of his parachute harness and pushed him backward toward the crawlway, just as the plane was hit with a jarring concussion that rattled his bones and made his heart stop. He knew at once they were all dead. "Climb!" he screamed into the intercom at McWatt when he saw he was still alive. "Climb, you bastard! Climb, 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 climb!" The plane zoomed upward again in a climb that was swift and straining, until he leveled it out with another harsh shout at McWatt and wrenched it around once more in a roaring, merciless 45-degree turn that sucked his insides out in one enervating sniff and left him floating fleshless in midair until he leveled McWatt out again just long enough to hurl him back around toward the right and then down into a screeching dive. Through endless blobs of ghostly black smoke he sped, the hanging smut wafting against the smooth plexiglass nose of the ship like an evil, damp, sooty vapor against his cheeks. His heart was hammering again in aching terror as he hurtled upward and downward through the blind gangs of flak, charging murderously into the sky at him. Then, sagging inertly, sweat gushed from his neck in torrents and poured down over his chest and waist with the feeling of warm slime. He was vaguely aware for an instant that the planes in his formation were no longer there, and then he was aware of only himself. His throat hurt like a raw slash from the strangling intensity with which he shrieked each command to McWatt. The engines rose to a deafening, agonized, ululating bellow every time McWatt changed direction. And far out in front, the bursts of flak were still swarming into the sky from new batteries of guns, poking around for accurate altitude as they waited sadistically for him to fly into range. The plane was slammed again suddenly with another loud, jarring explosion that almost rocked it over on its back, and the nose filled immediately with sweet clouds of blue smoke. Something was on fire. Yossarian whirled to escape and smacked into Arfie, who had struck a match and was placidly lighting his pipe. Yossarian gaped at his grinning, moon-faced navigator in utter shock and confusion. It occurred to him that one of them was mad. "Jesus Christ!" he screamed at Arfie in tortured amazement. "Get the hell out of the nose! Are you crazy? Get out!" "What?" said Arfie. "Get out!" Yossarian yelled hysterically, and began clubbing Arfie backhanded with both fists to drive him away. "Get out!" "I still can't hear you," Arfie called back innocently, with an expression of mild and reproving perplexity. "You'll have to talk a little louder." "Get out of the nose!" Yossarian shrieked in frustration. "They're trying to kill us, don't you understand? They're trying to kill us!" "Which way should I go, goddammit?" McWatt shouted furiously over the intercom in a suffering, high-pitched voice. "Which way should I go?" "Turn left! Left, you goddamn dirty son of a bitch! Turn left hard!" Arfie crept up close behind Yossarian and jabbed him sharply in the ribs with the stem of his pipe. Yossarian flew up toward the ceiling with a whinnying cry, then jumped completely around on his knees, white as a sheet and quivering with rage. Arfie winked encouragingly and jerked his thumb back toward McWatt with a humorous moue. "What's eating him?" he asked with a laugh. Yossarian was struck with a weird sense of distortion. "Will you get out of here?" he yelped beseechingly, and shoved Arfie over with all his strength. "Are you deaf or something? Get back in the plane!" And to McWatt he screamed, "Dive! Dive!" Down they sank once more into the crunching, thudding, voluminous barrage of bursting anti-aircraft shells, as Arfie came creeping back behind Yossarian and jabbed him sharply in the ribs again. Yossarian shied upward with another whinnying gasp. "I still couldn't hear you," Arfie said. "I said get out of here!" Yossarian shouted and broke into tears. He began punching Arfie in the body with both hands as hard as he could. "Get away from me! Get away!" Punching Arfie was like sinking his fists into a limp sack of inflated rubber. There was no resistance, no response at all from the soft, insensitive mass, and after a while Yossarian's spirit died, and his arms dropped helplessly with exhaustion. He was overcome with a humiliating feeling of impotence, and was ready to weep in self-pity. "What did you say?" Arfie asked. "Get away from me," Yossarian answered, pleading with him now. "Go back in the plane." "I still can't hear you." "Never mind," wailed Yossarian. "Never mind. Just leave me alone." "Never mind what?" Yossarian began hitting himself in the forehead. He seized Arfie by the shirt front, and struggling to his feet for traction, dragged him to the rear of the nose compartment and flung him down like a bloated and unwieldy bag in the entrance of the crawlway. A shell banged open with a stupendous clout right beside his ear as he was scrambling back toward the front, and some undestroyed recess of his intelligence wondered that it did not kill them all. They were climbing again. The engines were howling again as though in pain, and the air inside the plane was acrid with the smell of machinery and fetid with the stench of gasoline. The next thing he knew, it was snowing. Thousands of tiny bits of white paper were falling like snowflakes inside the plane, milling around his head so thickly that they clung to his eyelashes when he blinked in astonishment, and fluttered against his nostrils and lips each time he inhaled. When he spun around in bewilderment, Arfie was grinning proudly from ear to ear like something inhuman as he held up a shattered paper map for Yossarian to see. A large chunk of flak had ripped up from the floor through Arfie's colossal jumble of maps, and had ripped out through the ceiling inches away from their heads. Arfie's joy was sublime. "Will you look at this?" he murmured, waggling two of his stubby fingers playfully into Yossarian's face through the hole in one of his maps. "Will you look at this?" Yossarian was dumbfounded by his state of rapturous contentment. Arfie was like an eerie ogre in a dream, incapable of being bruised or evaded, and Yossarian dreaded him for a complex of reasons he was too petrified to untangle. Wind whistling up through the jagged gash in the floor kept the myriad bits of paper circulating like alabaster particles in a paperweight, and contributed to a sensation of lacquered, waterlogged unreality. Everything seemed strange, so tawdry and grotesque. His head was throbbing from a shrill clamor that drilled relentlessly into both ears. It was McWatt begging for directions in an incoherent frenzy. Yossarian continued staring in tormented fascination at Arfie's spherical countenance, beaming at him so serenely and vacantly through the drifting whorls of white paper bits, and concluded that he was a raving lunatic, just as 8 bursts of flak broke open successively at eye level off to the right, then 8 more, and then 8 more. The last group pulled over toward the left so that they were almost directly in front. "Turn left hard," he hollered to McWatt as Arfie kept grinning. And McWatt did turn left hard, but the flak turned left hard with them, catching up fast, and Yossarian hollered, "I said hard, 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 you bastard, hard!" And McWatt bent the plane around even harder still, and suddenly, miraculously, they were out of range. The flak ended. The guns stopped booming at them, and they were alive. Behind him, men were dying. Strung out for miles in a stricken, tortuous, squirming line, the other flights of planes were making the same hazardous journey over the target, threading their swift way through the swollen masses of new and old bursts of flak, like rats racing in a pack through their own droppings. One was on fire and flapped lamely off by itself, billowing gigantically like a monstrous blood-red star. As Yossarian watched, the burning plane floated over on its side and began spiraling down slowly in wide, tremulous, narrowing circles, its huge flaming burden blazing orange and flaring out and back like a long, swirling cape of fire and smoke. There were parachutes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the plane gyrated into a spin and fell the rest of the way to the ground, fluttering insensibly inside its vivid pyre like a shred of colored tissue paper. One whole flight of planes from another squadron had been blasted apart. Yossarian sighed barrenly, his day's work done. He was listless and sticky. The engines crooned mellifluously as McWatt throttled back to loiter and allow the rest of the planes in his flight to catch up. The abrupt stillness seemed alien and artificial, a little insidious. Yossarian unsnapped his flak suit and took off his helmet. He sighed again, restlessly, and closed his eyes and tried to relax. "Where's Orr?" someone asked suddenly over his intercom. Yossarian bounded up with a one-syllable cry that crackled with anxiety and provided the only rational explanation for the whole mysterious phenomenon of the flak at Bologna. Orr! He lunged forward over the bomb site to search downward through the plexiglass for some reassuring sign of Orr, who drew flak like a magnet, and who had undoubtedly attracted the crack batteries of the whole Hermann Goering division to Bologna overnight, from wherever the hell they had been stationed the day before when Orr was still in Rome. Arfie launched himself forward an instant later and cracked Yossarian on the bridge of the nose with the sharp rim of his flak helmet. Yossarian cursed him as his eyes flooded with tears. "There he is," Arfie orated funereally, pointing down dramatically at a hay wagon and 2 horses standing before the barn of a Greystone farmhouse. "Smashed to bits. I guess their numbers were all up." Yossarian swore at Arfie again and continued searching intently, cold with a compassionate kind of fear now for the little bouncy and bizarre buck-toothed teammate who had smashed Appleby's forehead open with a ping-pong racket, and who was scaring the daylights out of Yossarian once again. At last, Yossarian spotted the 2-engined, twin-ruddered plane as it flew out of the green background of the forests over a field of yellow farmland. One of the propellers was feathered and perfectly still, but the plane was maintaining altitude and holding a proper course. Yossarian muttered an unconscious prayer of thankfulness, and then flared up at Orr savagely in a ranting fusion of resentment and relief. "That bastard," he began. "That goddamn stunted, red-faced, big-cheeked, curly-headed, buck-toothed, rat-bastard son of a bitch." "What?" said Arfie. "That dirty, goddamn, midget-assed, apple-cheeked, goggle-eyed, undersized, buck-toothed, grinning, crazy son of a bitchin' bastard," Yossarian sputtered. "What? Never mind." "I still can't hear you," Arfie answered. Yossarian swung himself around methodically to face Arfie. "You prick," he began. "Me? You pompous, rotund, neighborly, vacuous, complacent—" Arfie was unperturbed. Calmly he struck a wooden match and sucked noisily at his pipe with an eloquent air of benign and magnanimous forgiveness. He smiled sociably and opened his mouth to speak. Yossarian put his hand over Arfie's mouth and pushed him away wearily. He shut his eyes and pretended to sleep all the way back to the field so that he would not have to listen to Arfie or see him. At the briefing room, Yossarian made his intelligence report to Captain Black, and then waited in muttering suspense with all the others until Orr chugged into sight overhead, finally, with his one good engine still keeping him aloft gamely. Nobody breathed. Orr's landing gear would not come down. Yossarian hung around only until Orr had crash-landed safely, and then stole the first jeep he could find with a key in the ignition, and raced back to his tent to begin packing feverishly for the emergency rest leave he had decided to take in Rome, where he found Luciana and her invisible scar that same night. Chapter 16. Luciana. He found Luciana sitting alone at a table in the Allied Officers' Nightclub, where the drunken Anzac Major who had brought her there had been stupid enough to desert her for the ribald company of some singing comrades at the bar. "All right, I'll dance with you," she said, before Yossarian could even speak, "but I won't let you sleep with me." "Who asked you?" Yossarian asked her. "Why don't you want to sleep with me?" she exclaimed with surprise. "I don't want to dance with you." She seized Yossarian's hand and pulled him out on the dance floor. She was a worse dancer than even he was, but she threw herself about to the synthetic jitterbug music with more uninhibited pleasure than he had ever observed, until he felt his legs falling asleep with boredom, and yanked her off the dance floor toward the table, at which the girl he should have been screwing was still sitting tipsily with one hand around Arfie's neck, her orange satin blouse still hanging open slovenly below her full white lacy brassiere, as she made dirty sex talk ostentatiously with Huppel, or Kid Sampson, and Hungry Joe. Just as he reached them, Luciana gave him a forceful, unexpected shove that carried them both well beyond the table, so that they were still alone. She was a tall, earthy, exuberant girl with long hair and a pretty face, a buxom, delightful, flirtatious girl. "All right," she said, "I will let you buy me dinner, but I won't let you sleep with me." "Who asked you?" Yossarian asked with surprise. "You don't want to sleep with me? I don't want to buy you dinner." She pulled him out of the nightclub into the street and down a flight of steps into a black market restaurant filled with lively, chirping, attractive girls who all seemed to know each other, and with the self-conscious military officers from different countries who had come there with them. The food was elegant and expensive, and the aisles were overflowing with great streams of flushed and merry proprietors, all stout and balding. The bustling interior radiated with enormous engulfing waves of fun and warmth. Yossarian got a tremendous kick out of the rude gusto with which Luciana ignored him completely while she shoveled away her whole meal with both hands. She ate like a horse until the last plate was clean, and then she placed her silverware down with an air of conclusion and settled back lazily in her chair with a dreamy and congested look of sated gluttony. She drew a deep, smiling, contented breath and regarded him amorously with a melting gaze. "Okay, Joe," she purred, her glowing dark eyes drowsy and grateful. "Now I will let you sleep with me. My name is Yossarian." "Okay, Yossarian," she answered with a soft, repentant laugh. "Now I will let you sleep with me." "Who asked you?" said Yossarian. Luciana was stunned. "You don't want to sleep with me?" Yossarian nodded emphatically, laughing, and shot his hand up under her dress. The girl came to life with a horrified start. She jerked her legs away from him instantly, whipping her bottom around. Blushing with alarm and embarrassment, she pushed her skirt back down with a number of prim, sidelong glances about the restaurant. "Now I will let you sleep with me," she explained cautiously, in a manner of apprehensive indulgence. "But not now. I know when we get back to my room." The girl shook her head, eyeing him mistrustfully and keeping her knees pressed together. "No, now I must go home to my mamma, because my mamma does not like me to dance with soldiers or let them take me to dinner, and she will be very angry with me if I do not come home now. But I will let you write down for me where you live, and tomorrow morning I will come to your room for ficky-fick before I go to my work at the French office, capiche?" "Bullshit!" Yossarian exclaimed with angry disappointment. "Cosa vuol dire bullshit?" Luciana inquired with a blank look. Yossarian broke into loud laughter. He answered her finally in a tone of sympathetic good humor. "It means that I want to escort you now to wherever the hell I have to take you next, so that I can rush back to that nightclub before Arfie leaves with that wonderful tomato he's got, without giving me a chance to ask her about an aunt or friend she must have who's just like her." "Come? Subito, subito," he taunted her tenderly. "Mamma is waiting, remember?" "Si, Mamma." Yossarian let the girl drag him through the lovely Roman spring night for almost a mile, until they reached a chaotic bus depot honking with horns, blazing with red and yellow lights, and echoing with the snarling vituperations of unshaven bus drivers, pouring loathsome, hair-raising curses out at each other, at their passengers, and at the strolling, unconcerned knots of pedestrians clogging their paths, who ignored them until they were bumped by the buses and began shouting curses back. Luciana vanished aboard one of the diminutive green vehicles, and Yossarian hurried as fast as he could all the way back to the cabaret, and the bleary-eyed, bleached blonde in the open orange satin blouse. She seemed infatuated with Arfie, but he prayed intensely for her luscious aunt as he ran, or for a luscious girlfriend, sister, cousin, or mother who was just as libidinous and depraved. She would have been perfect for Yossarian, a debauched, coarse, vulgar, amoral, appetizing slattern whom he had longed for and idolized for months. She was a real find. She paid for her own drinks, and she had an automobile, an apartment, and a salmon-colored cameo ring that drove Hungry Joe clean out of his senses with its exquisitely carved figures of a naked boy and girl on a rock. Hungry Joe snorted and pranced and pawed at the floor in salivating lust and groveling need, but the girl would not sell him the ring, even though he offered her all the money in all their pockets and his complicated black camera thrown in. She was not interested in money or cameras. She was interested in fornication. She was gone when Yossarian got there. They were all gone, and he walked right out and moved in wistful dejection through the dark, emptying streets. Yossarian was not often lonely when he was by himself, but he was lonely now in his keen envy of Arfie, who he knew was in bed that very moment with the girl who was just right for Yossarian, and who could also make out any time he wanted to, if he ever wanted to, with either or both of the two slender, stunning, aristocratic women who lived in the apartment upstairs, and fructified Yossarian's sex fantasies whenever he had sex fantasies, the beautiful, rich, black-haired countess with the red, wet, nervous lips, and her beautiful, rich, black-haired daughter-in-law. Yossarian was madly in love with all of them as he made his way back to the officer's apartment, in love with Luciana, with the prurient, intoxicated girl in the unbuttoned satin blouse, and with the beautiful, rich countess and her beautiful, rich daughter-in-law, both of whom would never let him touch them or even flirt with them. They doted kittenishly on Nately and deferred passively to Arfie, but they thought Yossarian was crazy and recoiled from him with distasteful contempt each time he made an indecent proposal or tried to fondle them when they passed on the stairs. They were both superb creatures with pulpy, bright, pointed tongues and mouths like round, warm plums, a little sweet and sticky, a little rotten. They had class. Yossarian was not sure what class was, but he knew that they had it, and he did not, and that they knew it too. He could picture, as he walked, the kind of underclothing they wore against their svelte feminine parts, filmy, smooth, clinging garments of deepest black, or of opalescent pastel radiance with flowering lace borders, fragrant with the tantalizing fumes of pampered flesh and scented bath salts rising in a germinating cloud from their blue-white breasts. He wished again that he was where Arfie was, making obscene, brutal, cheerful love with a juicy, drunken tart who didn't give a tinker's damn about him and would never think of him again. But Arfie was already back in the apartment when Yossarian arrived, and Yossarian gaped at him with the same sense of persecuted astonishment he had suffered that same morning over Bologna at his malign and cabalistic and irremovable presence in the nose of the plane. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "That's right. Ask him," Hungry Joe exclaimed in a rage. "Make him tell you what he's doing here." With a long theatrical moan, Kid Sampson made a pistol of his thumb and forefinger and blew his own brains out. Hupple, chewing away on a bulging wad of bubble gum, drank everything in with a callow, vacant expression on his 15-year-old face. Arfie was tapping the bowl of his pipe against his palm, leisurely, as he paced back and forth in corpulent self-approval, obviously delighted by the stir he was causing. "Didn't you go home with that girl?" Yossarian demanded. "Oh, sure, I went home with her," Arfie replied. "You didn't think I was going to let her try to find her way home alone, did you?" "Wouldn't she let you stay with her?" "Oh, she wanted me to stay with her, all right," Arfie chuckled. "Don't you worry about good old Arfie. But I wasn't going to take advantage of a sweet kid like that just because she'd had a little too much to drink. What kind of a guy do you think I am?" "Who said anything about taking advantage of her?" Yossarian railed at him in amazement. "All she wanted to do was to get into bed with someone. That's the only thing she kept talking about all night long." That's because she was a little mixed up, Arfie explained. But I gave her a little talking to and really put some sense into her. You bastard, Yossarian exclaimed, and sank down tiredly on the divan beside Kid Sampson. Why the hell didn't you give her to one of us if you didn't want her? You see, Hungry Joe asked, there's something wrong with him. Yossarian nodded and looked at Arfie curiously. Arfie, tell me something. Don't you ever screw any of them? Arfie chuckled again with conceited amusement. Oh, sure, I prod them. Don't you worry about me. But never any nice girls. I know what kind of girls to prod and what kind of girls not to prod, and I never prod any nice girls. This one was a sweet kid. You could see her family had money. Why, I even got her to throw that ring of hers away right out of the car window. Hungry Joe flew into the air with a screech of intolerable pain. You did what? He screamed. You did what? He began wailing away at Arfie's shoulders and arms with both fists, almost in tears. I ought to kill you for what you did, you lousy bastard. He's sinful, that's what he is. He's got a dirty mind, ain't he? Ain't he got a dirty mind? The dirtiest, Yossarian agreed. What are you fellas talking about? Arfie asked with genuine puzzlement, tucking his face away protectively inside the cushioning insulation of his oval shoulders. Come on, Joe, he pleaded with a smile of mild discomfort. Quit punching me, will you? But Hungry Joe would not quit punching until Yossarian picked him up and pushed him away toward his bedroom. Yossarian moved listlessly into his own room, undressed, and went to sleep. A second later it was morning, and someone was shaking him. What are you waking me up for? He whimpered. It was Michaela, the skinny maid with the merry disposition and homely, sallow face, and she was waking him up because he had a visitor waiting just outside the door. Luciana! He could hardly believe it. And she was alone in the room with him after Michaela had departed, lovely, hale, and statuesque, steaming and rippling with an irrepressible, affectionate vitality, even as she remained in one place and frowned at him irately. She stood there like a youthful female colossus, with her magnificent columnar legs apart on high white shoes with wedged heels, wearing a pretty green dress, and swinging a large, flat white leather pocketbook, with which she cracked him hard across the face when he leaped out of bed to grab her. Yossarian staggered backward out of range in a daze, clutching his stinging cheek with bewilderment. Pig! She spat out at him viciously, her nostrils flaring in a look of savage disdain. Vive come un animale! With a fierce, guttural, scornful, disgusted oath, she strode across the room and threw open the 3 tall casement windows, letting inside an effulgent flood of sunlight and crisp, fresh air that washed through the stuffy room like an invigorating tonic. She placed her pocketbook on a chair and began tidying the room, picking his things up from the floor and off the tops of the furniture, throwing his socks, handkerchief, and underwear into an empty drawer of the dresser, and hanging his shirt and trousers up in the closet. Yossarian ran out of the bedroom into the bathroom and brushed his teeth. He washed his hands and face and combed his hair. When he ran back, the room was in order, and Luciana was almost undressed. Her expression was relaxed. She left her earrings on the dresser and padded barefoot to the bed, wearing just a pink rayon chemise that came down to her hips. She glanced around the room prudently to make certain there was nothing she had overlooked in the way of neatness, and then drew back the coverlet and stretched herself out luxuriously with an expression of feline expectation. She beckoned to him longingly, with a husky laugh. Now, she announced in a whisper, holding both arms out to him eagerly, now I will let you sleep with me. She told him some lies about a single weekend in bed with a slaughtered fiancé in the Italian army, and they all turned out to be true, for she cried, finito, almost as soon as he had started, and wondered why he didn't stop until he had finitoed too, and explained to her. He lit cigarettes for both of them. She was enchanted by the deep suntan covering his whole body. He wondered about the pink chemise that she would not remove. It was cut like a man's undershirt, with narrow shoulder straps, and concealed the invisible scar on her back that she refused to let him see after he had made her tell him it was there. She grew tense as fine steel when he traced the mutilated contours with his fingertip from a pit in her shoulder blade almost to the base of her spine. He winced at the many tortured nights she had spent in the hospital, drugged or in pain, with the ubiquitous, ineradicable odors of ether, fecal matter, and disinfectant, of human flesh mortified and decaying amid the white uniforms, the rubber-soled shoes, and the eerie night lights glowing dimly until dawn in the corridors. She had been wounded in an air raid. "Dove?" he asked, and he held his breath in suspense. "Napoli." "Germans?" "Americani." His heart cracked, and he fell in love. He wondered if she would marry him. "Tu sei pazzo," she told him with a pleasant laugh. "Why am I crazy?" he asked. "Perché non posso sposare?" "Why can't you get married?" "Because I am not a virgin," she answered. "What has that got to do with it?" "Who will marry me? No one wants a girl who is not a virgin." "I will. I'll marry you." "Ma non posso sposarti." "Why can't you marry me?" "Perché sei pazzo." "Why am I crazy?" "Perché vuoi sposarmi." Yossarian wrinkled his forehead with quizzical amusement. "You won't marry me because I'm crazy, and you say I'm crazy because I want to marry you, is that right?" "Si." "Tu sei pazz," he told her loudly. "Perché?" she shouted back at him indignantly, her unavoidable round breasts rising and falling in a saucy huff beneath the pink chemise, as she sat up in bed indignantly. "Why am I crazy?" "Because you won't marry me." "Stupido," she shouted back at him, and smacked him loudly and flamboyantly on the chest with the back of her hand. "Non posso sposarti. Non capisci? Non posso sposarti." "Oh, sure, I understand. And why can't you marry me?" "Perché sei pazzo." "And why am I crazy?" "Perché vuoi sposarmi." "Because I want to marry you." "Carina, ti amo," he explained, and he drew her gently back down to the pillow. "Ti amo molto." "Tu sei pazzo," she murmured in reply, flattered. "Perché?" "Because you say you love me. How can you love a girl who is not a virgin?" "Because I can't marry you." She bolted right up again in a threatening rage. "Why can't you marry me?" she demanded, ready to clout him again if he gave an uncomplimentary reply. "Just because I'm not a virgin?" No, darling, because you're crazy." This book is continued on cassette number 5, side 1.